We're here to grade the most played green spells in all of Commander.
I'm Mia, and I keep quiet when I'm winning.
I'm BZ. I am not afraid to be the arch enemy. We are the Nitpicking Nerds, sponsored by Card Kingdom. We're talking about Magic cards. We're going to be talking about very highly played Magic cards. So if you want to get those cards for yourself, if you don't have enough copies or you don't have enough at all, go to Card Kingdom because they got great prices. And if you let them know that we sent you by using the link in the description, we all benefit.
I love getting the giant package from Card Kingdom and being like, oh my god, there's 40 cards in here in one convenient place. We're also sponsored by Dragon Shield, best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
If you use the code
Nerds
at checkout, you can save 5% of your Real Money tax dollars on your entire order, which includes the rose gold dual matte sleeves that are gold on the inside and rose on the outside, and they look super cool.
Pretty awesome. We're also sponsored by Moxfield. Not yet. Settle down. And we're also sponsored by ourselves because we have extra gameplay content, gameplay podcasty content that you can't see anywhere else. And there may just well be new things coming for Patreon down the pipeline. But Mia, we also want to talk about something else today.
We're sponsored by MTG Commander Codex. This is the best way to show off your commander and track life and commander damage and casts and so much more.
Not only is it a cool way to customize your command zone, but it also opens up and has storage on the inside, and it's just plain cool.
This is only available on Kickstarter for a limited time, so go check it out using the link provided.
So we're here to grade Magic the Gathering cards, specifically green ones, the 30 most played green cards on EDHREC. We are going to assign a letter grade to all of them after giving you all of our thoughts. The letter grade is more of a cherry on top. The real meat of it is what we actually have to say about the cards, but I think it's helpful as just a quick, what do we think about this in 5 seconds? Okay, here, it's a B-, so we're going to go over what the grades actually mean. We've got A's. These are auto-includes, cards you have to give a reason not to play. The best cards to fill their given role, like a ramp spell or a tutor. They're also potentially irreplaceable, or they're the best possible synergy pieces in a given archetype. Next up is B. They're powerful cards. They require maybe a little bit of work, or they're a little bit less powerful, a little bit less auto-includey. They can include staples or build-arounds. We also have C's. These are kind of replaceable. They're serviceable. They're never really essential. They're not going to be auto-includes. They're also build-arounds that require a little bit more setup. We also have D's. They're mediocre, outclassed by a lot of other cards that do similar things. They're really heavy build-arounds that require a ton of work to get going. And finally, we have F. These are cards we'd recommend avoiding all the time, or just nonsense that only works with one specific commander in one specific scenario. I don't think we're going to see too many Fs in the most played cards in the format, but that is what that would look like. Just a note, every one of these grades, we have to give them, best to worst type gradings, but you could still play whatever cards you want. Commander isn't only about power. That's how we're grading cards today, but you can put a card in if it makes you happy.
We're trying to see about whether we would play them, why we think about this way, but we're not going to judge you if you like some of the cards that we give a lower grade, or if you want to play some of the cards that we personally would not play. I mean, it's Magic, right? We all have different opinions.
Speaking of which, shoutouts to number 43, which did not make the list, Croston Grip. This card, I checked, Nitpicking Nerds did a video 3.5 years ago on the same 30 most played green cards, but obviously back then it was way different. It was number 13 3.5 years ago. I hope that we've had something to do with the fact that people are playing it less because we think it's stinky. So let's get to the actual number 30. Mia, what do we got?
We have Avenger of Zendikar, 5 green for a 5/5. When it enters, you create a 0/1 plant for each land you control, and whenever a land you control enters, you put a 1/1 counter on each plant you control. I play this in probably only one green deck at the moment, and it is a landfall type deck, and it's a good budget finisher because, for 7 mana, you want to have an impact on the game, and if you have a ton of lands like you often do in green, then this could be a great way to do it. But I also think that there are things that outclass it nowadays, and there are just better things in that 7 mana slot.
Yeah, 7 mana is a very contested slot. It already was back when this card was hotter, but now I think there's just so much going on. It's tricky. It's definitely a card that will win you games if it sits in play for long enough, if you can accrue all the value on the plants. I think you probably want a little bit of extra synergy in favor of fetch lands or extra landfalls or ramp spells to make Avenger that much scarier because this is a card that's going to gum up your opening hands, and it's not playable during the first, 4 turns of the game, even if you ramp into it, because sometimes, you ramp into this with a Soul Ring, and then you get, 3 plants or something, so it's a little tricky there. I think it doesn't necessarily offset the fact that it's not going to do much early, and so late game, you're kind of left with this replaceable thing of, you could play Avenger, then play a land, I guess it's like your 8th land, get a counter on your plants, even in the best case scenario where you untap, you're going to put maybe, 2 more counters and you're going to attack for 20, which is pretty good. But that's still not oh my God, the game's over. We got 1 or 2 more turns of this. So gives you time to disrupt it. I don't think it's the cream of the crop.
Yeah, it shines in my Uro deck because that is a budget landfall type deck. But if you're not on a budget, I think you can do better for 7 mana. And if you're not playing landfall, I would say that this is not the best finisher that you can have. So overall, we are giving it a C-.
Yeah, definitely. It's still a card that will have impact in a game. I think it just falls into that replaceable level to me. I think this card's very replaceable.
It's a pre-con card. That's kind of where I like classify it, or a budget card, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it sees play outside of that all over the place, but I kind of have it in that range as well. Like, you could put a lot of different 7-drops in your deck and have them be about as good as Avenger. That's how we feel. Number 29, we have Harrow. 2 and a green, instant as an additional cost to cast the spell. Sacrifice a land, search for 2 basics, and put them onto the battlefield. That does mean they're going to enter untapped. This is better for landfall decks where you care about lands enter. If you're playing something like, I don't know, Avenger of Zendikar, this can give you more lands entering at once than an average ramp spell can. The downside is it's 3 mana, and it only ramps you up 1.
Maybe that this take is because of who we are and how we build as people, but even in the most budgety of budget, I'm not playing that many basics unless I'm in a mono color or I'm in a 2 color that leads very heavily to 1 color, because I think nowadays we are getting so many good non-basic lands that we can be playing in Commander. So with the 3 mana slot for ramp, which I usually don't want to be in to begin with, I'd usually prefer all my ramp to be 2 or 1 through mana dorks, artifacts if I'm not in green, or just 2 mana ramp in general. I would really want more of a bigger impact, and I don't think Harrow is kind of where I'm getting it.
I think there's a lot of cards that are sitting at almost the same level as Harrow, and you have to pick Harrow when your deck would take greater advantage of it. I don't think you should ever just be going to Harrow. You say, I'm building a green deck. Before deciding the commander, put Harrow in. I think it's really contextual. I wouldn't just throw this in a random deck. The other place I've seen Harrow be pretty good that's like kind of niche is like teamer decks where you really care about instants and sorceries, because Harrow is really, really good to copy. It's really, really good to like continue playing spells after, because it costs 3, but it gives you 2 mana back right away. So it really only costs 1. So if you can fire it off with some other stuff, definitely homes for Harrow. I just don't think it's like this go-to card. Just a nice role player. Every once in a while, you reach up into that spice rack and you pull out Harrow.
Yeah, the average green deck does not want to be casting a bunch of instants and sorceries,
Right.
but if you do want to be doing it, that's awesome, which is why we put it at a C+. The next card is one of the, if not the best mana dork, depending on your stance on it. It's Delighted Halfling at 28. Green mana for a 1/2 that you can tap to add colorless, or you could tap it to add 1 mana of any color, but only to cast a legendary spell, but it can't be countered at this point. I think that I am always happy to see this in my opening hand, especially if I'm trying to power out my commander as quickly as possible.
This card is fantastic. I think mana dorks as a whole are a little bit underrated. They're a little bit slept on. That's going to sound ridiculous to half of you, and the other half of you are going to go, yeah. And so, like, I'm going to get hate on both sides. But I do think there's, like, this little stigma about mana dorks of, like, well, they get swept up in board wipes, and sometimes I lose them. They're creatures, they're more vulnerable, but they are fantastic. They are so good to be able to accelerate you out during the critical, like, first 5 turns. Mana dorks are how you get ahead. Even though they're not considered fast mana, they still really create some busted starts. And I think Delighted Halfling, after we've played with it for a year or two now, it's one of the best ones. It's up there. I think the only other contenders are like Deathrite Shaman and maybe like Birds of Paradise, but they're all really close. The fact that you can rainbow fix on legends, which we all have in the command zone, so that's gonna matter on the first 2 turns, and that it gives you the bonus of like no countering my stuff. This card has a huge impact on the game, even though it's a mana dork.
Honestly, I love the fact that it's not just an add 1 mana of any color type deal, but only for legendaries, because that would still be playable, don't get me wrong, but you can still use it later in the game to tap for colorless, so that if you need to cast an instant or sorcery and your commander's still out, you still have access to that mana. I think the versatility of that is awesome, and the not being able to be countered has been incredibly useful in a lot of games, especially the high-powered ones where a free counterspell can come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and if we want to, there's a lot of different types of green ramp. There's sorceries and instants that put lands into play. There's creatures that put lands into play. There's creatures that tap for mana. There's auras that enchant lands to make mana. And so I'm thinking, like, what is actually the best ramp to play? I think mana dorks are at the top of that list in terms of like efficiency, powering things out, consistency. There's a lot of them that's also helpful. But I think for this specific one, Delighted Halfling, I give it an A. I think this could basically go in any green deck.
I think A is perfect for this. If I am building a higher power green deck, this is automatically going into it. The next card is 27. it's Nature's Claim, one of our favorite removal spells. Green for an instant, you can destroy target artifact or enchantment. Its controller gains 4 life. This has saved my butt quite a lot, especially on turn 1 when you blow up someone's Soul Ring immediately.
I've called this the green Swords to Plowshares before. That's pretty accurate. It doesn't exile, but it's got that like very efficient cost. It's only 1 mana. That's the least amount of mana you can pay for a spell besides 0, in which case you're not paying anything. So that's the least amount you can pay. And it's a super hyper efficient. It even casts a wider net than Swords. It doesn't exile, but I think let's not compare it to Swords anymore. I'm just making a joke. The Nature's Claim is a very, very strong card. I like to have it in basically every green deck due to its efficiency and the wide net that it casts to remove.
I think the fact that you're in green and you're usually having more mana than the rest of the table means that your very efficient removal hits harder than everyone else's, because I'm not going to say it's like free, but when you're sitting with 3 open mana and you can kind of do a bunch of things, then you have a lot more options when you can cast your spells for very cheaply. And Nature's Claim really fills that role. And being able to fire off turn 1 is incredibly useful at times.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm happy that this card is in the top 30 over like, Croson Grip. I think this card is, the fact that it's 1 mana is relevant every single time. You're saving mana over these other more expensive, like a Naturalizer or Croson Grip. I think Nature's Claim is a card, because sometimes we say, hey, if I'm playing a very creature-centric deck, I don't want to have that many removal spells or ramp spells that aren't creatures, because I can easily sort of port them over and shift and give up a little bit of efficiency for more synergy. Nature's Claim is kind of the exception, one of them anyway. I love to have it, even in the creature-heavy decks, because if somebody busts out like a Rest in Peace or Humility or something, I'm going to have this answer that's going to just take it out, and it won't succumb to some of the weaknesses that creatures do.
Yes, because of that, we're going to give it an A-. This is not going into every green deck, but the efficiency can't be beat.
Yeah, if you show me any deck, and we do these on Patreon, we do deck audits all the time, I've never cut a Nature's Claim from a green deck, and I'm never going to. We say we're going to take this deck, and we have 10 cuts and 10 adds to make. Nature's Claim is never going to fall into that because it's so fantastic. It's such an efficient card. Number 26, we have Scoot Swarm, kind of a recent addition to our top 30. 2 and a green for a 1/1 landfall. You get an insect, but if you have 6 or more lands, you get a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So what happens is you play this when you're about to play your 6th land on turn 5 or 6 or whatever, and then you go second Scoot Swarm. Now they have to kill 2 of them. And once you get any more amount after that, it's board wipe or you're dead.
I'm happy to see it at 26. I feel like for a while, at least when I started playing Commander, it felt kind of unobtainable to get Scoot Swarm. But with the recent reprints in Commander decks and just precons, this has been amazing. It's dropped down to only a couple dollars.
I think I remember it might have been up to like 10 or 12 at some point, and then that was a little annoying to pick it up.
But now I think it's less than 5 because of some recent reprints, like in the Simic one from MH3, and that's awesome to see. And I love the fact that it's at 26 on the 30 most played green cards now.
I like this card because it doesn't ask a ton of you. I think I still have it in like a build around category where it does require some work. You want to fetch after you play Scoot Swarm so you can, increase the clock. Once you get up to like 16, the numbers are a joke. So after you hit 16 Scoots, your next couple lands are how you win the game. From that point, you don't need to get to 1,000,000 Scoots. You only need to get to 100, which is 3 steps away from 16 or something. So once you can get that, this is one of the best landfall payoffs, and this is also, I think, one of the cards that puts Avenger of Zendikar to shame, where like I can just play this 3 mana random dork that requires no more investment, and it starts doubling and exponentially growing up, maybe geometrically, making it a win con by itself versus 7 mana. I can't play it early, and I'm gonna need a bunch of lands just to get up to like 20 power.
Honestly, the 6 lands is just so easy to hit, and that as this point, especially if you are ramping, which you're trying to do in the Scoot Swarm decks to begin with. This is out of control so quickly, and for 3 mana, I think this is better than Avenger of Zendikar, even if it was like 3 mana versus 3 mana, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, because the play pattern too is you want to play both of these cards and then hit your next land drop to get immediate value. So Avenger, I have 7 lands in play, and I'm trying to hit my 8th now. Hopefully it's a fetch land, but Scoot Swarm, it's 3 mana, and I want to be hitting my 6th. So what's happening almost every time is I pay 3 mana, play my 6th land, which still gives me 3 mana. Now I can play a land and fetch just the same as Avenger, but I can also follow it up with a Harrow or a Cultivate or whatever and get extra landfalls. It's just gives you so much more opportunity to break it in half.
It gives so much more freedom, and because of that, we're giving it a B+.
Super solid. Next up, the Great Henge. This is a monster of a card. 7 green artifact. Costs X less to cast, where X is your highest power among creatures you control. Taps for green, and also just gains you 2 life randomly. And whenever a non-token creature you control enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you draw a card. This card does not ask a ton of you. It does cost 9, but I think green decks in general tend to have access to creatures that have power 4 or 5. So I would hesitate to even say you have to build around this super hard. If you have a 4/4, this thing costs 5 mana, and then it refunds you 2 of it right away, and then it draws you cards for the rest of the game.
Honestly, I've tried this in so many decks, and it's so good no matter what. This you can throw this in basically every deck so long as you have creatures in it, and like a fair amount. I threw this in an elf deck, and my biggest creature in there was like a 3/3 most of the time. We had 4/4s on the top end, but that doesn't matter. It was mostly 3/3s, and I was still able to hit this because I had so many mana dorks that I was still able to make that casting cost, and because a lot of the elves are very low to the ground, I was drawing a ton of cards too and making them bigger, and then gaining 2 life, and then the fact that you can use that 2 green mana immediately if you have more stuff to like churn out and get more cards. This really does do everything. It's the payoff, the enabler, and all you have to do is actually just get to the casting cost. You could put this in any deck.
Yeah, you really could put this anywhere. I think this is an easy A. Great Engine's fantastic. It can run away with the games. It's such a good value engine. We're going to go to a card that is very different from the Great Engine, but still very good. What we got?
We have Crop Rotation at 24. It's green for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this, you sack a land. Search your library for any land, put that card onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. This is the best rate that you're going to be getting for a land tutor. You do need to actually have a land to be able to sacrifice to do it, but I think at this point you're going to be having that, especially if you are tutoring for your best land.
Boy, how easy is it to have one land? Pretty easy in Commander. I'd say it's almost guaranteed if I were to be so bold and to say that. But yeah, Crop Rotation, this is an interesting one because there's a lot of the lands you want to tutor, like Field of the Dead or Cabal Coffers or Valakut or some common ones, that they want you to have more lands. So sometimes it will seem like the tutor's like Hour of Promise, where they're going to ramp you into that 7th land or the 6th land you need and then tutor the thing. They seem like they're more impactful, but when you just need the land right now, once you get to the point where that land would be good, or you're tutoring up something like Ancient Tomb or Gaia's Cradle that don't care how many lands you have, they just care about what your board state looks like, or in Ancient Tomb's case, it's just fast mana. This card is ludicrous. It is only as good as your best 2 or 3 lands, but if your best 2 or 3 lands are anything like Gaia's Cradle, Nykthos, Cabal Coffers, Field of the Dead, this card is ridiculous.
Your deck should be, I'm not going to say built around those lands, but they should be able to take full advantage of those lands if you're going to be putting Crop Rotation in. But you can't really beat the 1 mana tutor. That's just the best rate that you can really get
to the battlefield. It puts it in play untapped. You can fire off the Ancient Tomb for a mana positive exchange right away. You can fire off the Gaia's Cradle or the Nykthos right away. Like, this card just also being an instant surprise, end step, fetch the thing you were scared of. Now I get to use it fully on my turn, maybe even at the end of the turn.
Yeah, if you have instants.
It is the best land tutor in terms of mana value, getting the land into play. So easy A for Crop Rotation. Next up, 23. Rishkar's Expertise, 4 green for a sorcery. Draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control, and then you can cast a spell that costs 5 or less from your hand for free. This is obviously a little bit of a chunky card. 6 mana, solid investment, definitely requires you to have at least a 4/4 or a 3/3 in play to get any sort of value off of it. Otherwise, it could be a disaster. I think this card has been totally fine, middle of the road, pretty good budget card.
Honestly, yeah, let me preface this by saying that I like this card a lot. However, I do also put it at the point where of those like kind of pre-con level cards, I think of this with like Avenger of Zendikar, where it's kind of chunky, it's not the best rate, but it does what it's supposed to. It does it at like, with good efficiency, and you just happen to need a little bit of extra things to get going for it, and it's a little bit later. I feel like this is good in the slower games, or if you could just power gigantic things out very, very quickly, like Selvala. That's a place where I have it, where it's like, it's still a very high powered deck, but I can still take full advantage of the effects of this.
Yeah, bad in the early game, but pretty awesome once you get a creature, especially since the 6 mana is like a steep cost to pay up front for this type of effect, but you also get to cast, preferably a 5-drop with it, which is that's huge mana advantage if you can manage that. Draw 6, cast a 5-drop. Like, now we're cooking. You got some defense, you got some offense, your hand is refilled. Pretty great. But I think C+ is a fair rating for it because it is on that replaceable side. There's a lot of cards like this. We'll probably actually get to one later. Number 22, what do we got?
This is Tireless Provisioner, 2 and a green for a 3/2. Whenever a land you control enters, create a food token or a treasure token. BZ and I have slightly different grades about this, but we do both agree that this card is good.
Unfortunately, this is better than one of my favorite cards of all time, Tireless Tracker. I think making treasures when you get hit land drops is just kind of silly, with the bonus of 10% of the time, if you have extra mana, nothing to do with it, or you're hurting on life, you can make food and actually bring yourself back from the brink of death. This is a better Lotus Cobra for sure. It's a very strong card. It creates permanence. There's permanence entering and leaving for those sacrifice stuff. It goes in a lot of decks, not just landfall.
Honestly, just there are more food synergies lately too. So if you're playing that route and you don't need the extra mana, as BZ said, it might not just be for the life too, or it might not just be for the artifact permanent that you wanted. Maybe you have something where you can forage. I think that Tireless Provisioner is finding more and more homes, and this is where our opinions differ a little. I think that this is an A-. I've put this in a lot of decks that don't always care about treasure. Well, it's not just like aren't specifically caring about treasures or food, but because I am playing so many lands, because it is such a good way to ramp. And I'm just, it's very easy to play this on turn 4 and then hit a land drop immediately, get a treasure, and then play a 2-drop. I would put this at A-. I think that this can go in most decks, provided you're not playing at the highest level.
Yeah, I have a pretty similar opinion of the card, but my final grade is I would give this probably like a solid B. It's not a card I find myself going to all the time. I don't think it's a card I would start more often than not in a random deck with like no information about it. I do think it's very good though. It's undeniable how strong the card is. Number 21, we have Wild Growth, the card that has just risen in the ranks. If you've watched Nitpicking Nerds for 8 years, you've known how our opinion has only gotten better with this card. Green for an aura, enchant land. Whenever enchanted land is tapped for mana, its controller adds an additional green. We're talking cheap, early game ramp that's really hard to interact with. If you were worried about your mana dorks dying, what if it had haste and didn't die to most board wipes?
I mean, I think this is very good too, because it's not like Utopia Sprawl where you have to hit it on a forest. You can put it on any land turn 1, and getting that extra green is really impactful.
Yeah, it's even turn 1, it's neutral, right? It's as good as a Land of Elves would be on turn 1, because next turn you're going to start profiting. Any turn after turn 1, and this costs 0 the turn you play it, because it just put it on a land that you didn't tap, and then it'll just refund itself immediately. This is fantastic. It has been so good. This card has been secretly the reason I've won dozens of games where people look and they go, oh my God, BZ's got 6 5/5s in play. I can't believe he did that. It's like, it was Wild Growth, like this part of the problem where things went wrong for you.
Plus, it just has extra synergy with Enchantress decks. Being able to cast this and then draw a card immediately, and those type of effects really helps those decks propel into faster than other decks.
Oh, Enchantress decks, when you play Wild Growth, you feel like you're cheating sometimes. What a great card. I think it's a solid B. It might even be B+, but I don't want to get greedy. I think it's an amazing card. You should play it more. Next up, we have a super staple. Number 20, Reclamation Sage. 2 and a green for a 2/1 ETB. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. This was the successor to Acidic Slime. I think that card is, it's fallen out of our top 30, that's for sure. I love how cheap this is. It synergizes with creature decks, which green tends to be almost always some kind of creature synergy focus, whether that's power, graveyard, token swarm, whatever. So this card just slices and dices. It's just totally solid. He always shows up and he always does his job.
It cares if you have elves, if that is important to you, if you're doing some sort of blink type thing or ETB effects. This is awesome, but I have been, I guess, just leaning away from it lately. It's a very good effect, but with effects like Nature's Claim and Pick Your Poison and stuff like that coming out, I feel like unless it's very on theme to I need a creature for this deck, I need an elf for this deck, something like that, I'm going farther away from Rec Sage.
I think this card's fantastic. I just think it's a little bit less essential than it used to be. We've gotten Pick Your Poison, Lauren recently. I know there was a Guilds of Ravnica, Night of Autumn was similar-esque, and then Druid of Purification too.
One more mana.
How many of those do you need to play? It's not that Reclamation Sage is bad, and it's still great, and you probably still play it more often than not. It's just that every once in a while, it actually doesn't make a green deck. I think it's still a B-. It's still a very, very strong card. Can't fault anyone for not playing it, but we're just saying every once in a while, we don't play it, and it's not the biggest deal.
I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, if we keep getting things, it becomes, more outclassed. I mean, we've seen that with your previous list, too.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Also, Haywire Might was another one. That's you just have so many options, and they're all way better than, sorry, Acidic Slime, but Acidic Slime's a distant memory now at this point. Next up, number 19.
This is Sylvan Library. 1 in green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your draw step, you could draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards in your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, pay 4 life or put the card on the top of your library. I think that this card is pretty powerful because it comes down as, very quickly on turn 2, and you can get additional cards for it. If you have any sort of life gain synergies or any way to win the game very quickly, this can propel you to the win. But I also don't see this as a very essential card either.
Yeah, I think this card is way overplayed in terms of I think generally when we see this as the number 19 most played commander card, I think more of that comes from casual commander versus higher power 9 out of 10, or CEDH like a 10 out of 10. So I don't really get it. I think this card doesn't have as much oomph in those casual pods. I think this card gets stronger the shorter your game is, because if I can just pay 16 life for 2 mana and draw 4 extra cards and then win the game with those 4 extra cards, that's awesome. But don't expect to be able to do that when 5/5 flyers are a concern. Where like people are building out boards and you're not closing the game out with a combo. I just think Sylvan Library is a little I don't value the default at all. Being able to rearrange the top 3, like that's not worth 2 mana. So you're going to have to pay 4 life to draw 1 card over and over. And if you're in a casual deck with a slower game, that's just not that great.
I've seen people die to this because that beginning part doesn't really matter, and the games are going on so long that 4 life here, 4 life there is hurting them a lot. I think that unless you're winning before turn 6, I'd say that you shouldn't be playing this, or unless you can stack the top of your deck in like the first couple cards, and then you can consistently draw the cards that you're tutoring for.
Yeah, I have a Cascade deck that has this card in it, and it's very good because one of the commanders is Kydel, who cares about the number of cards you draw. Even if you put 2 cards back with Sylvan, you still have drawn 3 this turn because it's an old card that has terrible wording. But that's nice synergy. And then also, if you want to set up Cascades or Miracles, you put them back on top. So it's got uses, got corner case uses all day. But like, should you play this in a random green deck? You don't need it. You really don't. I have this at C+. You have it a little higher at B-, but they're pretty close.
Yeah, I think that you can skip it most of the time, but if it has synergy, that this is a great card in those decks.
And if you're fast.
Yes, the next card is number 18. It's Beast Whisperer, 2 green for a 2/3. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you draw a card. I like putting this in a lot of decks because I'm playing a lot of mana dorks often, and that this helps with a lot of that consistent card draw.
It's also a creature, so in your heavy creature decks, this can go in no problem. Like, oh no, should I play Great Henge? I really want to hit 50 creatures. Oh, I can just play Beast Whisperer, maybe some other friends of his, and I don't have to worry about that. Or you can play Great Henge in addition, but the 4 mana means this is a pretty cheap card draw engine. And it also kind of says, hey, don't you want to trigger this more? This gets better the cheaper your creatures are on average. If your average mana value is like 4.5, I don't think you should play this card. But if you're playing elves, mana dorks, just yet another reason that mana dorks become good is because they cash in for cards in the mid game, even if they would die to board wipes. We're playing Beast Whisperers and Great Henges, and our mana dorks are drawing cards. But all that stuff, all the cheap things, your Rex Sage, your casting from graveyards, they're all going to get you value.
Yeah, it's every cast too. So even if your thing gets countered, at least you'll get a card back with this out. We have it at a B-. This is, we play this in a fair amount of decks. I play this in at least 2 or 3.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty close to in every single green creature deck that we make. As long as it's not really clunky, we're happy to play Beast Whisperer in the deck. Number 17 is a very simple card, but it's very good. It's Fyndhorn Elves, green for a 1/1, taps for green. There's a couple different mana dorks like this. We're not going to grade any of them any differently. They're all basically the exact same creature. I think that's, though, a B+. I think we cannot understate the value of ramping on turn 1. Most players take turn 1 off. If we're taking it to play a ramp spell that is, akin to rampant growth until it inevitably dies or something, I'm happy with that. And as we've mentioned a million times, there's a million ways to get value out of a mana dork that isn't tapping for mana. Drawing cards when it enters, drawing cards when you cast it, sacrificing it for value, etc.
It really, really matters if you can utilize all of your mana. And even in late game, if you can give it haste or something, this can be a 1 mana literal ramp right now thing. So being able to get all of those triggers, ETB triggers, dice triggers, whatever, is really important. So we have this at a B+ with the other ones that are coming up too. Number 16 is Return of the Wild Speaker. 4 and a green for an instant. You choose one. You either draw cards equal to the Gray's power among non-humans you control, or non-human creatures get +3/+3 until end of turn. I like this card because it has a lot of versatility. Usually the non-human part does not come into play because most things you're playing in green are not humans, and having an overrun staple to that is nice. However, getting to 5 mana means that this is a mid to late game card, so it will be dead in your hands for the first few turns.
Yeah, it's not even about getting to 5 mana, because once you hit 5, you probably won't have like a 5/5 in play to get max value off drawing cards, and you're definitely not going to have a board that's worth attacking with right now. So it's like even later than that is when you want it. However, it does slice and dice. It can win the game if you're ahead, or it can propel you to that point where you would be ahead, and then you finish up with some other overrun that you draw. So I like it. I think it's a solid little guy. He does show up to his job. I think he's like a C, though. I don't think he's the best at his job.
I think he's a C, too. I group him with like Rishkar's expertise in that 5/6 mana slot. The next
Totally.
card is number 15. It's Worldly Tutor. Green for an instant. Search your library for a creature card. You reveal it, shuffle it, and put that card on top. This is the best rate that you're going to get for a tutor in green.
Yeah, it finds a creature, finds any creature, it puts it right on top. Well, I think it's pretty simple to say that tutors are amazing. The utility, the toolboxness of it, being able to find any answer that you need right now on the end step before you go, then you draw it. Very fantastic. I think this is an A-level card. One note, though, I don't know how good this card is in like the hierarchy of tutors, because it's definitely worse than a lot of the black tutors.
Yeah.
So like if you're playing black and green, I don't know if you need Worldly Tutor. You might just be able to play Vampiric and Demonic and whatever else. Maybe even Entomb is better depending on your deck. So it's a weird one. I still think it's fantastic. You can't go wrong with it, but just note that it's not the best tutor, period.
Yeah, maybe you're trying to find your secret commander and you want to play every tutor that can find it. Maybe this is the option for you.
Secret Commander. I have a Secret Commander deck on Moxfield.com, which you can look at. I'm trying to Voltron out Imperial Archangel, and it's very janky. But with Moxfield's intuitive UI and useful features, I can sort and tag the deck however I want to do it, and it lets it be an easy viewing experience for you. And if you like the deck, you can comment. If you think it's stinky and terrible, you can comment, and I'll happily respond to you. I think that's very cool. There's this social media aspect. Moxfield just has it all.
We love Moxfield, so go check out our profile there if you want to see any and all of our decks. But the next card we have on here is number 14. It's Garrick's Uprising, 2 and a green for an enchantment. When it enters, if you control a creature with power 4 or greater, you draw a card. Creatures you control have trample. Whenever a creature you control with power 4 or greater enters, you draw a card. This does a little bit of everything. It is pretty cheap for what it does. 4 mana for power 4 or greater when this comes in is easy to do to get that card draw. And creatures you control having trample has been surprisingly effective. You know, when cards like Return of the Wild Speaker don't give trample and stuff, pairing that with this can really mean the difference between life or death for your opponents.
Oh yeah, definitely have to build around this card. You cannot throw it into a deck, but the trample is a nice upside, and unlike some of the other cards that I'm less high on, like Elemental Bond, you can play this after your first couple 4-power creatures and still get at least one card off of it, so it replaces itself right away. I love that aspect of this. I think this has value in the late game. Totally cool. Just a nice card. It's hard for this to go super wrong for you. I don't think the ceiling is very high. You're going to draw a couple cards over the course of the game. That's great. You're not going to draw as many cards as with Beast Whisperer or with Great Henge, but it seems like a C+. It's just a rock solid card. Love that this has been reprinted, so now it's worth, like 5 cents, so budget players can enjoy it.
Plus, they have that new border in Foundations. You should go check that one out.
Oh yeah, the Constellation border. That one is nice. Next up, you may have seen this card before. It's number 13, Elvish Mystic. It's another green mana dork. It's still a B+. These cards are great. Please don't sleep on them. I will remind you every time I see one on this list. What's number 12?
Number 12 is Sakura Tribe Elder, or Steve as we often call him. 1 in green for a 1/1. If you sack him, you search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. Steve is good. I like Steve to get cards into the graveyard. I like Steve because he counts as a creature ramp-wise, but he's also 2 mana, and usually sometimes we don't want to be paying that when we have other mana dorks for 1 mana.
I think if you're talking about creatures that put lands into play, this is basically the best one. You don't have that many options, and this one costs 2 mana, and it overlaps perfectly with the green casting creatures or green I want creatures in my graveyard. That's like the 2 halves of the green creature deck. It works perfectly for both of them. This thing just keeps your deck humming along. I don't think Steve will ever be bad in Commander. We have it at a B right now. I'm happy to play it almost all the time, and I tend to play it over, let's say, a Rampant Growth, which is almost the same exact thing. I'll just take the creature. I'd rather have that type. I think it's better.
Yeah, whether you can reanimate it and then get the effect again, or if you just need a blocker, you block with it and then sack it. It really is a great card. So B, I think, is very apt for it. The next card is number 11. It's Llanowar Elves, green for a 1/1. Tap it to add greed. This is a mana dork. It's a B+. We like mana dorks a lot.
Don't sleep on mana dorks.
Number 10 is Eternal Witness, 1 green for a 2/1. When it enters, you can return target card from your graveyard to your hand. I think that this is like Rexage. I feel like it's getting outclassed. I don't think it's a bad card by any means necessary, but I'm trying to think of where am I playing this nowadays? And unless there are key parts of my graveyard that I really, really need, or unless I can get multiple triggers off of its ETB effects, I'm not playing this as often as I used to be.
I have also found that Eternal Witness feels less essential now, and it's not like the card's bad all of a sudden, don't get me wrong, but I think what's happening is Magic's being designed over the last 5 or so years when Eternal Witness used to be this auto-include, and now I don't find it as auto-include-y. Magic's just being designed with Commander in mind more. There's so many value engines, play it, draw 3 cards, destroy a creature, a lot of immediate value that I feel like the average card quality is much higher. so I don't need something that is always pretty good, when a lot more of my deck is like absolute banger. So I've played it a little less. It is not bad by any stretch. You could easily put this in any deck, but I think we have it like as a B- right about now.
That's fair. I also think that there are a lot more repeat effects because of all the cards that are being printed nowadays. Because with Druid, there's like pick your poison, for instance. So if I need that pick your poison type effect, I have other cards that will replicate it, so I don't need to only be searching for one in my graveyard to be using that again. I feel like that's another reason why I'm not going to this as much.
I mean, we do have stuff like, Evolution Witness came out. Skullbinder's old, but it did come out after Eternal Witness. There's like other options. It's still great. You can just play it, but I think maybe also, it's not really a great synergy piece. Like, it's always going to do the same thing in every deck, so it's not like, if you're a sacrifice deck, you really want it. It's like, you just kind of really want it. It's just a great card. Number 9, 3 visits, 1 on a green sorcery, search for a forest, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This has so many upsides over the classic, we'll use Rampant Growth, even though that's coming up, I think. Just 2 mana sorcery, go get a land. It enters untapped. And forest might seem like you're restricted to mono green, but you are in fact not restricted to mono green because you can get a shock land, a triome, whatever sort of dual land you want or tri-land to actually color fix you. And with the shocks, they still enter untapped if you pay 2 life.
We're getting so many good typed lands nowadays. I mean, we just got the Surveil lands, for instance, and then also with the reprints of Shocks and, Triumphs coming out in SNC, then I think that this is just, it doesn't restrict it in the slightest. This is an awesome card. And if you run out of all of the lands that you might need for fixing like that, you could still just get a basic forest if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think most of the time you can just play this card in most green decks. If you're a creature-heavy deck, yeah, maybe you don't need this card, and if you want to hit 50 creatures, you don't need 3 visits. But I think as soon as you're okay playing a sorcery that at 2 mana to ramp you, this is number 1, along with its brother, which I'm sure is also on this list. So we have it at B+. Absolutely fantastic. Really helps snowball the game. Why would I tap out for a ramp spell? Why wouldn't I just get refunded right away?
Yeah, I want my value now. But number 8 is Birds of Paradise, another mana dork, but the best one in theory.
Maybe.
Green for a 0/1 flyer. If you tap it, you add 1 mana of any color. Being able to get any color off of this and spend it on whatever you want is so nice and freeing.
It is the best mana dork for color fixing. We can at least say that because it makes mana no restriction, all colors. That's great. So I have it at A-. It's still a fantastic card. Even if it was tapped for colorless, it would still be great. But yeah, birds, it flies. There's a little bit of utility in that. Mostly, it's just better land elves. So we have it at A-. It's a little bit better than that. Number 7, Heroic Intervention. 1 in a black, 1 in a green for an instant. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. This card has only, I think, risen in the ranks over time. And this is a Nitpicking Nerds channel, so you're going to get the Nitpicking Nerds opinion on Heroic Intervention. I've never been blown away by this card.
I don't like this card. I have tried it in mono green. I've tried it in a lot of different power levels, and it is always unimpressive. And with the removal that is coming out nowadays, I think that it becomes less and less effective every second that I play Magic, whether that's with Blasphemous Edict, whether that's with Toxic Deluge.
Farewell.
Yeah, it's just, it doesn't matter at a certain point. And 2 mana is not that much to keep up, but this is never what I want to be keeping it up for. When I've had it in my hand, I was going wish this could be useful, wish this could be anything else, even a cantrip or something.
Yeah, see, even if this card was perfect protection, it would still have some problems because it's a purely defensive card. You can't do anything offensive with this unless you're like playing a board wipe or something, but you really can't like push through the advantage, or it's like, oh, now I drew Heroic Intervention, now I'm going to win. You kind of wait until you're about to get blown away, and then you kind of save yourself, or you save against a spot removal spell. So it's already a card that kind of no matter what it says is going to be bad in certain scenarios. And like I'm already skeptical at that point. But now we have Indestructible and Hexproof, which doesn't get around a lot of the removal, at least that we like to play. Even some of the targeted removal, targeted air quotes, is like, I'm going to play Soul Shatter, and I'm going to play Flare of Malice, and those things don't target, but they do tend to take out your biggest thing. And so cards like this just don't do anything against that. Bounce doesn't work, Tragic Arrogance, like Cyclonic Rift, like all these are like the most played board wipes. So I have not liked Heroic Intervention at all. I think it does have functions, but I think we have it at D+. You can play it, but I think there's better options. Maybe even just not playing a card like this. I think also another thing that kind of is weird about this card is I would never ever play it in blue, because a counterspell saves you against all board wipes and all spot removal, but it also does other stuff. So I really wouldn't play this alongside counterspells, and I really wouldn't play it in a white deck either, because you have Clever Concealment, which I think is 10 times better.
Teferi's Protection.
And Teferi's Protection, which always prevent every board wipe. So those two colors, like we just disqualified half of the decks you could play it in, and it just gets weird.
I mean, TP also protects your life total too, so it just does a little bit more. And Clever Concealment can be free. I think that I have not been impressed any time, and I always feel like you can't use it offensively, as you've said. You can't. It's not really that important if you're like swinging in and someone's like, oh, I guess I'll pump all my creatures, like surprise, they're indestructible. I don't really care at that point. But just like on the defensive, I'm going, okay, you have a board. Like, usually if I'm wiping the board, I'm trying to do it so I can rebuild faster to begin with. So at that point, it's like you have a board, I have a board. It's whatever the other people really want to do. The next card is another card that is a sorcery ramp. It's Kodama's Reach at number 6. 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put one onto the battlefield tapped and one into your hand. Then shuffle. I am not playing this even in budget anymore. I think that along with what I said earlier about basic lands, I'm not playing them as much because of all of the plethora of different lands that we're playing. That it coming into the battlefield tapped is still not what I want to be doing turn 3. That's just a little bit too slow nowadays.
Yeah, I feel like if you're playing Kodama's Reach and the card we'll get to later, I think I would just challenge you to reassess it. See if there's a card that does ramp faster or does ramp in a way that synergizes with your deck more. Because I think once you start hitting 3 mana, you start to get into like the mana rock category, right? Like almost every 2 mana rock is good. But once you start getting into like the 3 mana rocks, I'm kind of asking for a lot more. I don't know if that's spoiled of me, but I don't really play 3 mana rocks unless they're specialized. So if your deck is like an instant sorcery deck, maybe Kodama's Reach is good for you. But I think it's not worth paying the extra mana to sort of draw a land. It's rampant growth plus draw a land. I think in a lot of cases, I'd rather just have rampant growth and rely on my card draw elsewhere. I have never been impressed by this card. I've never played this card for a synergy reason. I think that's a very corner case. So if you're a creature heavy deck, I would challenge you to just cut it for Wood Elves or something like that. I think it'll just be better.
Yeah, I think so few green decks are reliant on sorceries as a specific archetype that, this is number 6 that we're talking about. This is the 6th most played green card. I don't think that corner case really extends to every deck that we're talking about. So we're going to put this at a D.
Yeah, I think it's a D. I really think it's completely replaceable. I have not had a hole in my heart for, there's no Kodama's Reach sized hole in my heart that I'm going, I just can't seem to hit my 4th land drop. It's like, I'm good. I don't really need it. Number 5, Nature's Lore, a card we would play instead. It's the same thing as 3 visits, so it also has a B+. It also finds a forest into play, but definitely highlighting, looking right next to Kodama's Reach, I'd rather spend basically 1 mana instead of 3 mana to what is essentially, very similar onboard thing. There is differences of next turn if you would hit or not hit your land drop. It's definitely valuable to hit your land drop, but turn 2 ramp that refunds you half of it right away is just unbeatable in terms of quality. So, Nature's Lore, top tier.
I love Nature's Lore. The next one is number 4. It's Farseek. 1 and green for a sorcery. Search your library for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain. Put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. The amount of times I've seen this in mono green needs to stop. I mean it. This cannot find forests.
It cannot.
And that's the only thing it can't find.
Yes, I know that it kind of, your eyes glaze over a little bit. You're like, all right, all the basics, but yeah, it doesn't find forests. So we definitely had to correct a few people playing mono green. That's not a real concern we have with the card. I think this is a totally acceptable ramp card. It's not one I go to often. I think it is on the replaceable level, but I think it's also on the better side of 2 mana ramp. I think it is better than our boy rampant growth that we'll finally get to next. So I think it's a C+. And you can't really be too disappointed by it. It color fixes nicely. Yeah,
it's just the fact that it can find triomes or shocklands. It's pretty nice, but again, because it comes in tapped, C+.
Yeah, and not really cream of the crop. But number 3, we've talked about them all day. Rampant growth is here. It's just 1 and a green sorcery. Search for a basic, put it into play tapped, then shuffle. This is just like the OG.
Yeah, this is fine, I guess. It's serviceable. I'd rather be playing a 2 mana ramp versus 3 mana ramp. So if I am on just the most budgety of budgets and I am playing a lot of basics, this isn't bad. I'd play this over Kodama's Reach any day, but I'm still not reaching towards this.
Yeah, we have to assume no budget for these grades for the most part. So, when I look at rampant growth, I go, okay, 2 mana sorcery, put a land into play tapped. What are my options that are better than that? Well, we just talked about Farseek, which is basically strictly better. It does everything it does for rampant growth, but it fixes you more. You can get a dual land with it. Rampant growth can't do that. Nature's Lore and 3 visits can get any dual land in your deck as long as your deck's built correctly, and they put them into play untapped if you want. So those are both better. Well, Sakura Tribuilder is a creature. Your green deck almost guaranteed cares about that in some way, shape, or form. And even like you said, as a chump blocker or an attacker in corner cases, also just makes it better. So now we're like, what is this, the 5th best option that you can play? So, and if you're already playing Mana Dorks and Wild Growths, which I do think are still better than Rampant Growth, it's tough to find room. Even though he's okay, I still think it's a C+. It's just tough to find room for you, buddy.
Like, how much are you trying to ramp at that point? Because you need other things that don't ramp in your deck.
Yeah, you're going to have to cast another spell eventually.
But the number 2 is Beast Within. 2 and a green for an instant. You destroy target permanent. Its control creates a 3/3 beast. I think that this isn't bad in mono green decks, or if you're trying to, I guess, get all of your options, but we are trying to go usually towards 3-for-1s or multi-targeted removal for that 3 mana slot. It's a very highly contested slot. So in mono green, I think it's good to get all of the permanents that you want to sweep, but outside of that, I'm not really playing it. I think 1-for-1 single target removal is rough.
It's good to have, I think, 1 or 2 catch-alls in your deck where you say, maybe I'm paying a little bit more for this removal spell, but I have the safety and the comfort that I can answer anything that hits the board. So whether that be Beast Within, Chaos Warp, Generous Gift, like 1 to 2 of those is okay. I think this card also gets a boost because it is a green way to deal with creatures, and that's a color pie break. So if you are not in black or white, I think this card is more appealing because not every color can just deal with creatures willy-nilly. So red-green loves it. Blue-green even might like it a little bit too. And the mono green, I think it's nice to have ways to answer creatures because most of the time you're like, Nature's Claim all day. Those artifacts, enchantments, they're done. But creatures, I only have this and like Kenra's Transformation, maybe a couple other ones.
Yeah, so we'll give it a B for that because it is good in certain homes.
But that brings us to our number 1. We have Cultivate. It's 2 and a green sorcery. Go get 2 basics, 1 in play, tapped, 1 into your hand. We already talked about it, but I do think this card is a D. I am surprised it's just so high. It never seems to waver as the most played green card. I know it's a budget card, but I don't think budget is the number 1 factor in determining what card is like the number 1 most played versus the number 2, because you can look at cards like Cyclonic Rift and it's in like 1 million decks or something. So I would once again challenge you to cut Cultivate for a more synergy card that costs the same mana or a cheaper card like 3 Visits.
Cultivate is so mediocre. You could do better, whether you're trying to churn out a bunch of Mana Dorks or whether you're trying to churn them out with like Nature's Lore and Steve and stuff. So I think that your decks will be powered up if you replace it for something else.
Yeah, I think even on a budget, we don't play this card. So I guess I want to maybe hammer that home for Cultivate because we have a lot of the Mana Dorks that are 50 cents or so. Wild Growth is very, very cheap. I think Utopia sprawls down too, and I love all of those cards, and I just think they're faster and they help your deck do its thing more than Cultivate. So try and cut Cultivate, see what happens.
But if you want to see more of our opinions, we actually have black cards here and how we've rated them.
Wow.